Now, talking about numbers, Dr. Kale, let me come back to you on this one. Mr. Riwani actually mentioned it, but the last data we have on the unemployment rate, for instance, is actually dated back to 2011, which put unemployment rate at 23.9%. Now, that figure obviously must have changed, but then there's no data to that, and it wasn't even, in your presentation yesterday. Is there any reason why?
Well, let me explain the problem we have with unemployment. The ILO's definition for unemployment requires you to only work for at least an hour a week. So once you've worked an hour a week, you are considered employed as far as the ILO definition is concerned. And we felt we could not use that because that did not reflect the reality in Nigeria. When we use that for Nigeria, we got an unemployment rate of less than 1%. And there's no way I'm going to release that to the Nigerian public. That's because Nigerians are entrepreneurial. If you go out and ask any Nigerian, did you work for an hour a week, you'll find that almost everybody did. So what we did to solve that problem was we now use the benchmark, 40 hours a week, which is the definition of full-time employment in Nigeria. So if you're not working full-time, 40 hours a week, you are considered unemployed. That means if you work 39 hours a week, you are considered unemployed, which is also incorrect. So because we felt that we did not have a proper measure, methodology, we are still trying to decide what the best way to address this is. We decided, you know what, until we are done with the work, rather than giving out figures that mislead in either overstating or understating the problem, let's work on what we think is a ideal methodology. Let's talk to experts, and when we are done and we have something that we believe can be used, we will now come up and update our figures. Now that's why we have not released any new numbers since 2011, because we are not particularly comfortable with 40 hours. In France, full-time employment is 35 hours. So that means everybody in France is unemployed. These weaknesses in the methodology, this difficulty in finding a common, and how do you select? Do you choose 5 hours? Do you do 10 hours? Do you do 50? You can't just pick these things arbitrarily. So we are speaking to a lot of experts. They have been working with us, trying to get what we believe is a better way of computing unemployment, underemployment in Nigeria. And when we are done, we will now start updating those figures, which I think that's the reason why we have not gotten these numbers updated since 2011. We have the numbers using the 40 hours a week because we have been collecting that regularly, but we don't want to put that out because we don't want to mislead Nigerians about the intensity of the problem or over or understate the problem.
Well, Dr. Kale, as you know, Mr. Riwani is here with me in the studio, and he's asked to ask you a question. So, Mr. Riwani, please go ahead.
Yes, telecoms, you said, is now 9% of total output. Does this telecom figure include ICT as a whole, or telecom? Because the 9% looks pretty low compared to what it should be.
It is telecoms and information services. So yes, it does include ICT.
Okay, Dr. Kale, please respond to this if you will. Could you just briefly tell us your methodology in using, the methods that was actually used to come up with these figures that we have right now?
Okay, I think there are three main measures. I mean, national accounts is an international standard used worldwide, and our methods have to be in line with those national accounting principles. We upgraded our model to the 2008 system of national accounts from 1993. We are using the latest international standard for industrial classification, the Central Product Classification, which are the latest recommended internationally, and also the development of a supply use table matrix, basically, so we can balance the supply and use side of the economy, and these again are standard international procedures. When we now get that, when we get the framework, when we got the matrix, the framework right, the next thing to do is to populate data. Now, this is why it took us 2 years. It doesn't take us 2 years to analyze data. Most of the 2 years was spent trying to gather data from a huge amount of sources. We check what data is existing. We had to collect accountant generals, state accountant generals, audited accounts from all the 36 states, including the FCT. We had to go to as many establishments as possible. We had to do a listing. We expanded our frame from 83,000, which is what we had previously and was used for the 1990 year, to over 850,000. That's over 10 times larger. Because of the small, medium-scale enterprise survey that was conducted in 2010, we had a bigger understanding of the informal sector. We didn't even cover the informal sector completely. We just covered them a lot better. And because of better data sources, we calculated trade margins, we calculated waivers, collected data on waivers and concessions, we get a huge amount of data. And throughout this process, we had our partners from the IMF, the World Bank, ADB, who made it extremely difficult for us to ensure that we covered every single, and this is why we kept postponing the release, mainly because we wanted to get it right. Now, postponing that release was a personal embarrassment for me, but I felt that the integrity of the process and the numbers were a lot more important than my own personal embarrassment. So it was a huge process. I think we are one of the only countries that has a detailed methodology of the process that was taken on our website. All the sectors where the data was collected and how they were processed. It's a huge document on our website for those that are a lot more interested in that.
Kale, just before I come back to Mr. Ariwani to continue this conversation, some of the sectors you actually said witnessed the fastest activities was the financial, you said electricity and gas, arts and entertainment, and movie. I want to ask you, based on the survey, electricity and gas, but we know that that's an issue that we seem to be battling with at the moment. We seem to have we don't have regular power supply, and so from that result, or from what the figures that we saw, you're saying the fastest activities was actually witnessed in electricity and gas. How does that really add up?
Well, if you notice, the electricity, gas are the fastest growing, but they contribute less than 1% of GDP. It's actually quite small. You know, it's a base effect. When you are extremely small in terms of electricity and gas, the production is very small. It's very easy to double it quite easily. All you have to do is have a period of good electricity supply, and it goes down significantly, and it goes back to where it was, nothing more than where it was previously. Then you have a huge jump. So it's a very low. What is important is the share of electricity to GDP, which is extremely small. Is a base effect, like I said. The smaller you are, the easier it is for you to jump. And if you look at the top fastest growing sectors in the period, you see the motion pictures, film production. You will see electricity and gas. These are extremely small sectors that are beginning to expand. You will see things like water supply, because it's extremely small as well. It's less than 1% of GDP. So the lower you are, I think that's what the electricity, gas, air conditioning supply activity shows. It is mainly a base effect coming from an extremely low base, so it's very easy for it to double or triple. But again, its contribution to GDP reveals the shortages that you're referring to in the system. It's quite different from motion pictures where there's actually real growth. So I think that explains why you see electricity, gas, air conditioning supply as the fastest growing in the period. What matters, like I said, is the share of GDP, which tells you the performance of the activity in the overall economy. And if you have electricity, gas, and supply at 40%, but it's less than 1% of GDP, that shows you that it's still it's still a huge opportunity for growth, and that reflects the problems we're having in that sector.
Hold on to your thoughts. We'll come back to you in just a moment. Now, a lot of analysts are saying that there's likely to be a slower real GDP growth, based on the fact that this rebasing has actually now happened. Is that likely going to happen? What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, the growth rate will slow down, because what has happened is actually there was the GDP and there was the informal economy. Most of the growth you've seen is actually bringing the informal economy into the formal economy. So it's not an actual increase in aggregate output. But having said that, you now have a big base number, and then you have to grow. But fundamentally, what should be happening is a shift in the fundamental structure of the economy, away from oil dependence, away from gas dependence, and making it much more efficient. Now, how do economies grow? Economies grow because of productivity, because of technological change, and because of exogenous shocks. So if you take all of these three items, nothing has changed in Nigeria. Productivity has not increased, there's no technological change, and there's been no exogenous shocks. So what has happened is that there's been productivity gains due to maybe technology, IT, telecoms, and all of that. So the real work starts now. How are you going to use this data to now deploy resources so that you can actually achieve that quantum leap? Because if your potential GDP is actually growing at 11%, which is at full employment, and your real GDP is growing at 6.8 or 7%, the gap of 4% difference is quite significant. For example, South Africa has a 0.5% difference between potential and real GDP, right? In Japan, it's about equal. Now, the question is, how are you going to remove those constraints? One of it being power, the other one being productivity, the other work ethics. There's so many things that will go into it. But this is the heavy lifting time.
Now, Dr. Kale, we're fast spent for time, but thank you so much for still being here with us. In all of this, what still matters to people is their well-being, and they're very concerned about that. In fact, since the National Bureau of Statistics started talking about the rebasing of the GDP, the question has always been, how does that translate to money in my pocket? How does that translate to improved standard of living? So, looking at it now, you're the Statistician General of the Federation, and you, as much as the rest of other key players in the economy, advise on how best it is that these numbers can be used. So how can these GDP figures be made more inclusive?
Okay, I think the first part is measuring better, giving policymakers tools to understand the economy, so they can design policies, programs, projects that would improve the well-being of Nigerians, make them understand the economic better. I'll give you an example using unemployment. Now, if you, from the GDP numbers, you observe that most of your output is coming from capital-intensive sectors as opposed to labor-intensive sectors, then that sends you a signal that maybe your policy should be redirected towards labor-intensive sectors and strategies so that you can resolve unemployment issues. If I have a farm that hires 100 people and I buy 2 tractors, my output will actually double. In other words, my GDP will increase, but I might lay off half of my staff because now I don't need them anymore. And if that is how your GDP is growing, then the policymakers, because they want to resolve unemployment, might have to calibrate their approaches and strategies to ensure that the output does not grow at the expense of the people. You can actually grow and actually increase poverty. You can actually grow and actually increase unemployment. But these numbers helps the policymaker to know where growth is coming from, where growth is not coming from. And it's in this way that you actually can help and improve the well-being of the Nigerian. For example, the numbers will show that we have GDP growth, but there's high inequality, like Mr. Riwane said. What if I was a policymaker? What I would say is, okay, how do I make growth more inclusive? For example, do I devote the entire oil revenue to come up with unemployment benefits, to come up with some social security system, so that when output grows in oil and gas, that is additional income for the man on the street that's unemployed. That is how you use output growth to benefit the average man. But to do that, you have to know exactly the structure of the economy, what is driving that growth, where there are problems, and it's based on that you decide how to fix it.
Thank you so much. Just hold on to your thoughts there for me. Mr. Riwane, your last words as we end this conversation.
You will not be able to achieve optimal growth except you change the structure of the economy. The only way to change the structure of the economy is to alter factor prices. Factor prices are altered by creating dynamic equilibrium, and in other words, you will move towards currency convertibility. You will move towards removing subsidies on bank deposits, government deposits, and finally, you will remove subsidies on petroleum products and shift them towards production. If you do all of these things, which is a normal formula for growth, you will get superstar growth. Thank you.
Well, like the National Bureau of Statistics said, this will be recalibrated in another 5 years, and so we'll wait and see how that happens. Well, Mr. Bismarck Riwane, thank you so much for coming on the program. And Dr. Yemi Kale, thank you also for joining us on the program. I know it's a very busy day for you because you're going to continue to have need to talk to people more and explain the reason and the basis for the rebasing. Well, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule and joining us on the program this morning. Well, that's the program for today. Thank you so much for being a part of it. We've been looking at the rebasing, re-benchmarking of Nigeria's GDP and its implications for the economy. And like the Statistician General of the Federation says, you can actually go to the website to get more information on what this actually means. But that's the program for today. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Harriet Agbin.